Welcome back to U.S. History class, everyone. Today we're going to discuss the presidency of Warren G. Harding and our return to normalcy. You already checked out, didn't you? I know, it sounds super boring, but there's actually a lot of fascinating and somewhat depressing stuff to talk about. Let's start with Warren G. Harding. This dude got elected on a promise to return the United States to a simpler time. Wasn't it already simple, you ask? Well, no. It was a crazy time to be alive, if you managed to be alive, that is. Because remember, there was this thing called the Great War that we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks, and over 100,000 Americans did not make it back. And even if you did make it back, there was a decent chance that you may carry physical and mental scars to challenge your post-war life. 320,000 Americans returned home with injuries, some of those debilitating in nature. One historical study conducted by Yale University estimates that about 5% of all injuries sustained in battle during World War I were life-altering. If you were lucky enough to not have served, you still got a small taste of how horrific the war really was thanks to the photographs featured in newspapers and other printed materials. While we're on the topic of World War I, let's talk about why the Russians dropped out, because that's going to lead to some anti-communist hysteria in the United States. Basically, the Russian people turn on their government because there isn't enough food to go around, and they care very little for the war that they got involved in. The Russian Tsar and his family are murdered, and a group of Russian revolutionaries calling themselves the Bolsheviks, also referred to as the Reds, take over. The U.S. government was so alarmed by this communist takeover of Russia that they sent forces to back a group of anti-Bolsheviks who ultimately failed. This is going to create some hostility and distrust between Russia, or what becomes the Soviet Union, and the U.S. later on. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing all of this up is because there is this hysteria back home in the United States, which becomes known as the Red Scare. Basically, everyone becomes concerned that communist sympathizers, anarchists, Bolshevik spies, and yes, even labor unions are seeking to overthrow the U.S. government in order to implement communist control over the nation. It was all, exactly as I stated before, hysteria. There was simply no factual basis for any of this, and yet many Americans lived with this fear, and it led them to accuse innocent people of working against the U.S. government. So yeah, crazy time to be alive, right? Except it was even crazier. You know, this wild coronavirus pandemic we've been living through for the last 2 years? Yeah, you can stack something like that on top of all this other stuff that I just mentioned. The Spanish influenza, as it was referred to, killed almost 700,000 Americans, which is a similar threshold that COVID-19 recently passed. So yeah, you get it. Times were crazy. People wanted something that looked like normal. So this guy, Harding, runs for president promising just that. Does he deliver? Well, if you take into account the corruption and scandals of his administration, then no, because that's not normal. The most notorious case of corruption involving his administration became known as the Teapot Dome scandal, so called because the federal land that was involved in this scandal had a geographic feature that looked like a teapot, I guess. Basically, this land in Wyoming was sold off to oil companies after bribes were made to a cabinet official in Harding's administration. You can't take bribes for government property. That's how to not go to jail 101 for politicians. What was the effect of the Teapot Dome scandal? When the stories ran in the papers, it totally discredited Harding and his promise to return things to normal. But we'll never know how angry the public became over the scandal because he had a heart attack before he could run for re-election. That's all for me. I will catch you guys next time.